Hello and welcome back to the MedSpa Growth and Profitability Show. I'm your host, April Anazone, and today we're joined by Kristin Groop. And Kristin is also known as the Laser Chick. She created curricula for the Aesthetic Advisor Laser Academy, knowing that there was a better way to train laser operators to increase their skill set and comprehension of the subjects taught, rather than be a part of the certificate mill focused on profit, not student success. EALA students are taught relevant, timely, valuable information that is truly created and frequently updated by the Laser Chick. After spending 7 years as a lead instructor for the nation's largest laser training school, Kristin branched out on her own in 2012. Kristin is co-owner and patent holder of Skin Stylist, Microtherapy System, and Stereotip Applicator. She is a national speaker, educator, and has been featured on several international aesthetic magazines. So welcome, Kristin.
Thank you so much for having me, April.
I am actually really excited to have you on here because we've had different experts throughout the industry, but we haven't had a real instructor that has been there, hands-on, doing the work, and then teaching people in an ethical way, which is the most important thing. Like you mentioned in your intro, you're not there, of course you want to make some money, but you didn't build the curriculum around profits, really student success. So thank you for being a part of today's episode.
Oh, thank you very much. And yes, I mean, money keeps the lights on. So we all have to be profitable. And it's how I basically run my whole business, which is everything has to be safe, it has to be effective, it has to be profitable. So you do have to keep the lights on. But I also tell people that in the aesthetic industry, if money is your only motivation, you're going to make a very big mistake someday. And a lot of that comes back to training. So one of the things that I get to do is I'm an expert witness in laser lawsuits. So I see all the stupid things people do with lasers, which kind of guides my training into teaching them what stupid things not to do with lasers. Because I want them to be successful. And in order to be successful, they first have to be safe. But they have to understand why they're doing what they're doing, or quite frankly, they shouldn't be doing it.
And I just want to quickly ask, as an expert witness in laser lawsuits, what is the stupidest thing that you've seen or the weirdest thing that you've seen?
Oh, gee Louise. Probably one of the weirdest things was a woman who had a Brazilian done, and they burned her labia. Not great, but it is fixable. It's not like it's not fixable. And then she sued, but then her husband also jumped on the lawsuit saying that he couldn't basically have sex with her.
That's a pretty smart
and it was
lawsuit,
like a $1.2 million lawsuit, which I'm like, okay, it's not worth that much. So that's probably like one of the stranger ones. A lot of them, it comes down to training. Yeah. I mean, people don't go into this industry to hurt people. At least I like to think that they don't. But it really comes down to training. And unfortunately, when it comes to like light-based therapies, most states have zero training requirements. Mm-hmm. Arizona was the first in 2005 to add in laws regulating this industry. They made some changes in 2010. They just made some changes to their paperwork in 2019. But I feel very lucky to be at the forefront of some of these changes because I've been living with them since the end of 2004 when we knew they were changing in April of 2005.
Wow. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up becoming a laser instructor?
Okay, so I went to college and I graduated and I started selling fax machines. I wanted to be a copywriter, but it didn't pay enough money. And so I sold fax machines, and I worked for a manufacturer, Panasonic. I was their first training people how to use fax machines, and then I was their first female district sales manager in the United States. And after that, I ended up having twins. I stayed home for 8 years. And when I went back into the workforce, while I was staying home, I started doing other training things where I was an adjunct faculty member teaching total quality management, TQM, at college. I was also a CPR instructor and instructor trainer, so I went to the hospitals and taught the doctors and the nurses how to do CPR. I had a company called the Training Station, so training was always kind of in the background. Yeah. In 2002, I decided I didn't like what I was doing. So I had to figure out what do I want to be when I grow up. And I still haven't figured the grown-up part yet because they scare me. But I figured that, gee whiz, I really like skin. That's what my passion is. Now I'm in my mid-30s. I have 7-year-old twins. In the time, there was no rural medical school in the Phoenix area. You'd have to go down to Tucson to go to U of A. So I decided I'm going to become an esthetician. Get out of aesthetic school, work for my first doctor. He had a laser. And I went, okay, there's aesthetics over here. I want to play with machines. So I worked for him for 2 years. I ended up moving my practice over to a company called Physician Skin Institute, which was a sister company of National Laser Institute. I started working with them at the end of 2004. In 2005, they asked me if I could do the training. And when I got into the training, I did a first one, it was 10 days long, and I came out and it's like, this is not great information, we need to change it. So it took me about 3 or 4 months, because it truly, when you're training somebody, it comes down to what are you actually training on. You need good information, and it has to be scientifically based. It has to have peer-reviewed research in order to be considered valid training, in my opinion. It's not just I'm throwing words out of my mouth. I have to have substance behind it. So I built their laser program up for them. But throughout my time there, I just started seeing larger class sizes and less hands-on time available for my students. So I wrote my own curriculum. I got it approved through the state of Arizona, and then I was out on my own. So it allowed me to run things the way that I wanted to run them, which in order to do that, you have to basically own your own company. You don't get to do it at other places, but you get to do it for yourself. So I've been training in this space since 2005. I've trained probably about 10,000 people or more across the world how to use light-based therapies and aesthetic procedures. So I'm very lucky that I happened to get into an industry that was at the beginning just starting. And by the way, we're not even close to where we're going to end up. There's so many new things that we can discover that we can use with our devices. And, you know, one of the biggest questions people get me is the industry saturated, especially in Arizona because of our laws? And the answer is absolutely not. It's not saturated with good people. And by good people, I mean people who have the proper training to truly understand what they're doing and be able to get a better prediction of what their outcome is going to be with that client.
Absolutely. Can you talk about some of the major, I know there's been a ton of changes, but what are some of the major changes you've seen as far as really, I guess, as far as instruction goes, and what, I know you actually were one of the groundbreakers in what you do, but what are some of the other major changes going on?
Well, you know, what I've seen is it's kind of disappointing as an educator when I see people jumping into education that actually don't have the qualifications and the time spent in the industry. This is not a see one, do one, teach one kind of industry, and the industry is kind of, certain people in the industry are making it that way, where, you know, I see a procedure being done, I get to do one, oh gee whiz, now I'm qualified enough to teach it to be done, and it's not true. So you really have to look at the background of the person that's doing the instruction. And when somebody goes to open up a med spa, or they're opening up another section if it's a doctor in their practice of medical aesthetics, which is very popular because we're a cash-based business, you really have to look at what is the quality of the person that's educating you. How long have they been doing it? So you have to have, you know, some type of business education. You have to understand what is it going to take to get patients or clients into your office, get them processed through, get them happy, get them rebooked, get them to refer. So it's not just how do you run the machine. And people get so excited about buying their new machines, and it's super fun, and it's all new toys, and then they forget about all the background stuff that has to go into it. And for me, the education process doesn't start from, let's go buy a new toy. It starts from, okay, let's take a look at your patient demographics. You know, if you're going to open up a med spa, and that's what your goal is, the first thing you need to really understand is what your patient demographics are, because that, if you're going to be in the light-based therapy such as lasers and IPLs, that's really going to drive what treatments you can do and who you can work on. Because not all lasers and IPLs play well with all skin types. So what I like to do is tell people, it's like, first of all, before you just go jump in and buy something, slow your roll. Okay, let's figure out what's going to be best for your business. Okay, and then you need to look at the price points of those procedures, and can you support the business, and how long can you support the business because the first year of your business, you might break even, and that's considered a win. Yeah. But it all comes down to understanding what do you want to do, who are you going to do it on, and what does basically your demographics of your patients support you doing. Plus, it's one of the things that let's say if you are in Minnesota and your skin types are all lighter skin types and they've got a lot of sun damage, photofacials would probably be a great option. Mm-hmm. If you're living in an area where you've got mostly skin types 4, 5s, and 6s, like if you're down in maybe in Tucson or you're down in in the South, photofacials you can't do on 5s and 6s. So why are you buying the device? Right. And then what ends up happening, they buy a device they can't use, it sits in the corner, and they start getting resentful towards it. And the reason people don't use devices is because they're not trained well on how to use it. But it all comes down to buy the right device for your practice, so you don't buy something that's going to then sit in basically the corner. Then you've also got manufacturers who want to sell. Okay, that's what their job is, to sell. They don't really care what you're buying as long as they're selling. So a long time ago, actually one of the first doctors that I worked with in my company, I went down to Tucson. A salesperson that sold the gear, great salesperson, I know him. He's a really good salesperson. He sold a doctor who's Hispanic, whose patient base is all 4, 5s, and 6s, a CO2 laser, which is ablative, and a diode laser. 2 bad buys for $250,000. And after 8 months, he had used the diode laser like 3 times, and he had never used the CO2. So that's a $250,000 mistake.
Well, what you're looking at, because they do a really good job of breaking down exactly how much you could make per machine, per patient, but not knowing the demographics and not knowing the people that are actually going to walk in your door, and especially going to a conference and seeing them on stage and testing out and watching what's going on, you get excited and you're like, I see the possibility, but it's so very important.
And then they basically, this is how much money you can make, and you're going to pay off in 6 months. Is that reality? I always tell people, it's like, do your homework. If this is what you're going to choose to do with your life, then do your homework. And when you look at buying equipment, don't make yourself basically house poor because you've bought so much in equipment that you really can't use it that effectively. So, opening up a med spa and everything's great, but you have to, slow it down a little bit and really do your research and depend on the information that you're going to get as an individual, as opposed to just depending on what's being fed to you.
Wonderful. And when our medical spa owners are trying to pick a curriculum or pick a trainer to go with, I know you mentioned they should look at how long somebody's been training and what is the quality of their training, but how do they really determine that? Like, what are some key things that they could look for?
Well, and that's a great question, and that's sometimes a hard answer, because if you've got a lot of marketing behind a school,
it looks good.
Then that marketing is going to overshadow what the person's actual qualifications are. You can look at, the school, like in Arizona, we have to register what's now, it used to be ARA, which was the Arizona Regulatory Agency, Radiation Regulatory Agency. It's now the Arizona Department of Health Services. So they actually, on their website, if you're in Arizona, list out the schools that have approved curriculum. But even then, you have to, and I'm not going to talk badly about any of my fellow schools on camera.
Smart girl.
On camera. But truly, when you look at who owns the schools, or you look at, what their qualifications are, any of my instructors that I hire to help with my students have to be working in the field. That's not an option.
There are so many that aren't, and that's one of the reasons why we definitely wanted to talk to you.
Yeah, and they always say those who teach can't do. This is not in my school. Every person that works for me, and including myself, has to be working in some type of a med spa and working as a practitioner, because it's very hard to keep up on all the newest trends and the things that we're doing. But I truly wanted to hire only people that were working in the industry. And then you also need to look at a student-teacher ratio. How many kids do you have in a classroom for one person? The highest number I ever had when I wasn't working for myself was 15. Do the math on a 15-person day and an 8-hour day. How much time do they really get their hands on? Yeah. So that is a big portion of it. But then it comes down to taking a look at their curricula and understanding. Like, I've looked at some curricula and it's like 3 pages. I'm like, how the heck are you teaching laser physics out of 3 pages? So it's difficult. But really just looking at the internet, you can Google anybody. And so you can find out more information. And then I also tell us, like, if you're really looking, like, let's say you want to go to a laser training school, you can call and set up an appointment and do a school tour. And I do this also with my estheticians that are people wanting to go to aesthetic school. I always have, it's like, go and tour the school. Look at it, see how clean it is. Yeah. Because, if you go to a aesthetic school and the waxing area looks disgusting, probably you're going to see that in other parts of the school. Yeah. So really,
my mother-in-law has that about going to restaurants. She's like, if you walk in their bathroom and the bathroom's a mess, then the kitchen's going to be a mess.
I know, right? Yes. So it pretty much goes the whole thing. So just doing your homework. people depend on other people to do their homework for them. Yeah. One of my pet peeves is I'm on a lot of Facebook groups for estheticians and for different procedures. There's one for microneedling I'm on. And honestly, what frustrates me as an educator is people are trying to get their education from YouTube and Facebook. That is not good education, because I can look at any YouTube video and see things that, if they're teaching people about microneedling and they should be, bleeding out their ears at the end of the procedure and they're just there for age management. That isn't what science dictates. That is what somebody doing a YouTube video dictates. And I learned back, it's probably 10 years ago, I thought I could do dermaplaning and learn from a video on YouTube. When I got done, my medical director looked like a gang member. I had cut her, the whole term, I cut her up, like, everywhere. And I was mortified. I thought, gee whiz, maybe this isn't the best way. Maybe I need a human teaching me. You truly need to research the educators. And as I told you, I'm a difficult person to educate because I expect a lot. I ask a lot of questions. And here's one of the things that I will tell you with educators. The faster an educator talks, the less they really know about that subject. Mm-hmm. Okay? And I've seen people just fly through a class, and what they are hoping is that questions. You won't stop or pause long enough for somebody to ask you a question. Mm-hmm. Okay? I ask a lot of questions. I encourage my students to ask a lot of questions. I don't know everything. But what I will tell them, if I don't know, because I'm not going to make up an answer, is I don't know that answer. I will find out and I will get back to you. And that is an appropriate answer from an educator.
Absolutely.
But I've been in some classes that all of a sudden you go, gee whiz, it's done. And then the instructor's out of there. And that's usually a not very confident instructor, and they're not confident in the subject that they're training in. So I find that if somebody tends to give pauses or ask for questions, they tend to know more of the answer. And I ask everybody, because obviously with the laser chick, that was my first trademark in 2007. It was a nickname, and I turned it into a trademark because I wanted to market. Thank you. I wanted to market myself and wear laser chick shirts out so people would. I've got new clients. But what I ask people that went to laser school, and I ask them what laser stands for, and they can't tell me. I find that to be a problem. I mean, take some pride in your craft that you're working on, and actually understand the training that you're getting, but don't get it from a social media. That is not the appropriate area for a full board training. Now, we have different Facebook groups that all it is dedicated to training. Okay, mm-hmm. And we encourage every person that comes on to these, it's called evidence-based aesthetics, that comes on to that website to ask questions. When people come to me and I present them with the peer-reviewed research that drove the curricula that I'm working with, I encourage them to challenge me and go check it out themselves. Don't just believe me. I mean, yeah, I've got a pretty big podium to talk on, but you shouldn't just be believing me. You should also be doing your homework to make sure what I'm saying is correct.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to reiterate something here. If you are an administrator of a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group or any kind of group where you see this is going on, it is your responsibility and integrity of a person as the administrator, to point out that this is not appropriate. If somebody is giving tips that are not, not tips that are based on peer review or based on experience and knowledge, then make sure that you shut that down, or you delete that comment, because that's going to go, I learned it in this group, and that's going to just give your group a bad name as well. We see it going on way too much. And
it doesn't matter if it's a laser, it's an IPL, it's micro, it doesn't matter. If you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, you shouldn't be doing it.
Yes.
So when people want to, and I'll see this on Facebook, I want to do a chemical peel with microneedling. And I'm like, why? Well, because it's a more aggressive treatment. I said, but why do you want a more aggressive treatment? Well, because more aggressive is better. I said, but why? Yeah. I don't know. Well, if you don't know the answer and you're taking a peel that is meant to be on intact skin, and now you're putting microchannels in, and now that peel is going into it, you can't predict what's going to happen very well. So you just took something that a manufacturer made as something very superficial, and you just made it medium or a deeper peel. What are you doing? And they can't answer me. And then the other thing that I see is people diagnosing like we're doctors. I'm not a doctor. I do not play one on TV, even though I would like to.
The laser chick.
Yeah, call me the laser chick. Aspire. But you can't diagnose things. You can identify, but you can't diagnose. So I think people overstep their boundaries, and then we're going to start getting into trouble in the future is really using devices that are not appropriate for our licensure. There's a few things out there right now that's like approved for estheticians, and the person that's approving it is the person who's selling it. That's not an approval. I mean, the person that approves is what an esthetician can do in the state of Arizona is the Board of Cosmetology, nothing else. So it's not me. It's not somebody selling a device. And people are going to get into trouble because they look at the social media as this is what the end-all be-all is, and it's not. And so one of the things, what I work with a lot of doctors also, and they want to buy a laser in Arizona, and there's certain things that they have to have training as a medical director in order to, one, use the laser, to supervise people using the laser, and also to register the facility. And when they get to me to talk about training, they don't know this because the laser salesperson hasn't told them that, because it's not, and if you're asking for $125,000, it's not really sexy to say, hey, by the way, you're going to have to go get a 24-hour training, and you're going to have to register, and all these things are going to cost you additional money because it's not included. So people don't like to talk about it. But then I get a doc, and they're like, well, nobody ever told me. Well, do your research.
Absolutely. And no matter what piece of equipment you buy, you want to check into your local laws. We actually just did a podcast with a lawyer from Florida, which was actually very different from a podcast we did previously with a lawyer. So make sure you're checking your local laws as well. And I know you mentioned that you have kind of a hybrid training where they could do some of the curriculum online and then come in for training. Do you have anything where, or do you offer any consulting if somebody wants to do that beginning piece and, try to find their demographic, and what pieces of equipment should they purchase for their demographic?
Yes, so I had a dermatologist in Chicago, and they had a couple of issues with a couple of their laser techs where they had a couple of adverse events. Didn't turn out so well. So they invited me up for 2 days to work with them. And what we did was they did an online program ahead of time to go through laser physics and laser safety and all of these things that can be done ahead of time before we get to hands-on. One of the reasons I like doing a hybrid type of a training is it saves money on travel costs, and you still get the same information given to them. So they invited me in, and not only did we do training on the machines to understand how to be safe and effective, we also did a lot of profitability training. I like to teach practitioners how to maximize their revenue per hour per room, which is kind of different than a lot of people do, because I know how much I want my room to run per hour, per day, if somebody's in it. Most practitioners don't understand that part of the business, that this is a business. And if you're going to be profitable, you need to have, a goal of what does your profitability look like, and then how are you going to get to it. And then once you understand what your goal is, and you've got the people, then it's to train the people to understand how to get to that number. So when they walk into a room, they know that there's different opportunities, and we don't sell things to clients that they don't need, okay? But if you're doing hair reduction on somebody's bikini line, why the heck aren't you doing it on their underarms and maybe their lower legs? So, or if they're going to be buying products because everybody needs skincare products, why aren't they buying it from you? So a lot of the training actually that comes into aesthetics, and it's what estheticians tend to have a harder time with, is sales training. And understanding that this is, even though we're doing procedures, it's still a sale.
You're almost not completing your service if you're not offering the skincare, products after.
Well, because they're going to buy it from someplace. Okay, so, and you know what products are probably going to be best for them if you're doing the procedures for them. So looking at that is, and truly it's uncomfortable for a lot of estheticians who are the majority of the people doing these procedures. It's uncomfortable for them to, ask for the sale. But that is part of their job. So if they want to continue working for somebody else, or if they're going to want to continue working for themselves, they're going to have to sell something, because that's how this whole thing works. And again, we don't sell things that aren't that are inappropriate for our clients, but we look at other opportunities or missed opportunities for another procedure. Like if hair reduction, I consider the gateway drug of lasers. Okay. It's how you get people in the door. The pricing for hair reduction has gone down tremendously over the last 10 years. But it's a way to get familiar with your patient. Pretty much every person that I've done hair reduction, I also look at doing photofacials, or do I do microtherapy treatment, or I've got a lot of other devices at my disposal. And one, it's like having a toolbox with lots of tools, so we don't have to use the hammer every single time we want to do something. But having them understand and be trained on the different pieces of equipment and understand how we combine those pieces of equipment together to get a higher price point, but also to give our patient a more effective treatment is important. So although you can have the best device, I can take the best device in the world and have the worst outcome, and I can take an okay device and have the best outcome, and it truly comes down to the training of the practitioner.
Perfect. And speaking of training of the practitioner, where can people find you?
So you can Google my name, and pretty much all my entities will come up. And my last name is Groop, Groop, not O-U-P. You can look at Aesthetic Advisor Laser Academy. We also on skinstylist.com, which is our device that we manufacture. We can look at medical education resources. .net, which is another training branch of ours. I am on Instagram now, but under the Real Laser Chick. So I just took back my name. Some of my former students took Laser Chick, and instead of saying, hey, that's actually a trademark, don't do that, whatever. So it's under the Real Laser Chick. So we've got evidence-based aesthetics, and we spell aesthetics with an E, not an A-E, which is a Facebook group that they can go to for resources, and all it is training and training information. There's no sales of any products. It's one of the requirements we have for our own Facebook groups is you can post training sales, but you can't post anything else. I don't want any device sales. So there's lots of different ways that you can get to me. And again, skinstylist.com is one of our websites, but then there's also our Skin Stylist Instagram page.
Perfect. And I'll actually post a few of the links below in the show notes, as well as the Facebook group. So, Kristin, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of that great information.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your time.
I think you too. Have a great day.